When I was 14 years old, I was responsible for babysitting my little cousin at his home. It was an interesting experience that I remember well. It was an ordinary night, or at least it began like one. My mom and my aunt decided to go out shopping together. They were excited to explore the stores and find some great deals. Meanwhile, my dad and my uncle chose to spend their time at the movies. Enjoying a film and relaxing in the theater, it was a cozy afternoon, and the two of us, my cousin and I, spent time together in the living room. We were sitting on the soft couch, surrounded by the warm glow of the sunlight streaming through the window. The television was turned on, displaying a colorful cartoon he enjoyed watching, but I did not focus on it. Something felt strange and unusual. In the beginning, I found it hard to put into words what I was feeling. The house itself was quite lovely. It had a warm and inviting atmosphere that made you feel right at home. It wasn't my cousin who was causing the trouble. He was perfectly fine sitting there and laughing at the funny show we were watching. Even so, I couldn't get rid of that feeling. I decided to shake off the feeling and stood up to go check the back door. I'm not sure why, but when I locked it, I felt a small sense of relief wash over me as I strolled back through the cozy kitchen, heading towards the inviting living room. That's when I spotted him. A man stood quietly, observing the world around him. He stood outside, looking intently through the window, his eyes fixed on what was happening inside. He looked really terrible, like he hadn't taken a shower or eaten anything in a long time, maybe even weeks. His clothes were very dirty with lots of rips, and they hung loosely on his body. His hair looked like a wild and greasy tangle, and his eyes were locked onto my cousin. I stood still for a moment, feeling a tightness in my stomach that made me uneasy. What was he doing in this place? What made him look at my cousin for so long? At first, I thought it would be best to pretend that I hadn't noticed him at all. I didn't want to frighten my cousin at all. I stepped back into the living room, taking a deep breath to keep my voice steady and calm. "Hello," I said, trying my best to smile. "The time is passing and it's becoming late. Let's go up to the next floor. Your mom probably wouldn't be happy if you stayed up too late." He complained a bit, insisting that he wasn't tired at all, but I was able to encourage him to get up and start moving. Once we reached upstairs, I carefully tucked him into his cozy bed, making sure he was warm and comfortable. I gently reminded him to stay there and rest well. "I will be right outside," I said reassuringly. "Please just close your eyes for a moment, all right?" He nodded his head, showing his understanding, and thankfully, he didn't ask too many questions. After he got comfortable and settled in, I made my way back downstairs. My heart was beating really fast now, thumping in my chest so strongly that it seemed like it could explode at any moment. I quickly reached for the first item I saw, a meat tenderizer that was sitting in the kitchen. It wasn't the greatest weapon available, but it was something to have on hand. I made my way back to the window, the same spot where I had first caught a glimpse of him. The man had disappeared, leaving no trace behind. His absence was noticeable, and it left a lingering sense of mystery in the air. A wave of panic surged through my body. Where was he at this moment? I hurried to the front door, my heart racing, and carefully checked each of the locks to make sure they were secure. The deadbolt was locked tightly and the door hob felt firm and secure in place. I hurried back to the kitchen and took another look at the back door. It was still locked tight. I didn't see him outside, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that he was still there, quietly watching me from somewhere nearby. I walked back up the stairs and settled down right in front of my cousin's bedroom door. I held the meat tenderizer firmly in my hand, gripping it so tightly that my knuckles turned a pale shade of white. The weight of it felt both reassuring and intimidating as I prepared for what was to come. My cousin slowly lifted the edge of the blankets and looked out with curious eyes. He wanted to know what I was up to at that moment. "There's no need to worry about it," I said reassuringly. "To me, please just keep your voice down, all right?" He nodded his head slowly, but I could see the fear in his eyes now. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the police. My voice trembled as I shared what was going on with them. They told me that they would send someone to help, but it would take around 30 minutes for them to arrive. After I finished my call, I picked up the phone again and dialed my dad's number. He and my uncle were enjoying a movie together, and they were about 45 minutes away from home. They promised they would leave immediately, but deep down I had a feeling they wouldn't arrive in time if anything went wrong. Suddenly I heard a sound. The sound of glass breaking echoed through the room, sharp and sudden. A sound echoed from downstairs, sending a chill through my veins and making my heart race with fear. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the quiet space, each step slow and deliberate, as if the person wearing them was taking their time to make an impression. A person was inside the house. I looked over at my cousin. "Please stay under the warm covers. Stay still and please don't make any noise." His eyes were very wide, showing surprise. But he nodded his head and followed my instructions without hesitation. The footsteps echoed softly as they traveled through the house, each step causing the old wooden floor to creep gently beneath the weight. The sound seemed to linger in the air, adding a sense of mystery to the quiet surroundings. I sat there holding the meat tenderizer tightly in my hands. My heart was pounding so loudly that I worried it might alert anyone nearby to our presence. I could hear the man breathing now. His breaths were heavy and uneven, like the sound of a stormy wind blowing through the trees. He was looking through the rooms on the lower floor, carefully opening doors and shifting items around to see what was inside. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching as he made his way up the stairs. Every step I took sounded loud and booming in my ears like a clap of thunder. I leaned my back against the door, doing my best to remain as silent as I could. The footsteps came to a halt just outside my cousin's room, creating a moment of stillness in the air. I took a deep breath and held it in, feeling the air fill my lungs as I paused for a moment. The doorknob shook and made a rattling sound. However, he chose not to attempt to open it. He decided to keep going and looked into the other rooms upstairs. First, he checked the bathroom. Then he moved on to my aunt and uncle's bedroom. Then, just like he had appeared out of nowhere, I heard him quietly make his way back down the stairs. I stayed completely still. I held my breath, feeling a mix of fear and anticipation until I suddenly heard a new sound. It was the door to the basement creaking open, breaking the silence around me. He was making his way down there now. Minutes felt like they were stretching on forever, almost as if hours passing by. My legs were starting to cramp from sitting in front of the door for so long, but I felt too scared to move at all. At last, after what seemed like an eternity, I finally heard the distant wail of sirens echoing outside. The police rushed into the house, loudly giving orders as they looked around every room. I finally felt a sense of calm wash over me when I heard their voices announcing that the man was safely in custody. As I finally turned the doorknob, and when I pushed the door open, I was greeted by one of the officers standing at the top of the stairs. He was holding the man who appeared even more messy and unkempt when seen up close. His eyes were wide and looked all around the room quickly as if he was searching for something. He kept mumbling words that I just couldn't make out. The officer later shared that the man had managed to escape from a mental hospital, which was located in a province that was quite far away. He had been wandering for many weeks, sneaking into houses and frightening the people inside. That night I lay awake in bed, unable to close my eyes or drift off to sleep. Even after my parents and uncle returned home, and even after the police had gone, I found it hard to sleep. I lay there, wide awake, paying attention to every tiny noise around me. The picture of that man at the window kept coming back to me. He was just standing there, looking inside, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. I no longer babysit at all, even now. I'm unable to do that. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, one of those places where everybody knew everybody. My mom used to joke that the town had fewer people in it than her graduating class from the city we came from. It was the quiet place where nothing much ever happened, which is probably why my parents thought it was safe to leave me and my older sibling home alone that night. I was 7 years old and my sibling was 14, maybe 15. They were grounded for something silly. I don't even remember why. Maybe they'd talked back to my dad or forgotten to do a chore. Either way, my dad had locked both the house phone and their cell phone in his gun safe. My sibling wasn't happy about it, and honestly, neither was I. Without a phone, we couldn't call anyone if something went wrong. My grandparents lived down the street, and my great-grandmother had her own little house on their property. That night, my parents were heading over to check on her since my grandparents were out of town. They promised they'd be back soon and then we'd order pizza. That sounded fine to me. Pizza was always a good enough bribe to keep us happy. After they left, my sibling and I played video games for a while. Time passed and we started to get hungry. It felt like my parents had been gone forever, and I began to wonder when they'd be back. That's when I heard a knock on the door. Excited, I thought it was my parents with the pizza, so I ran downstairs. My sibling followed after saving the game. The front door had a big window, and I could see the person standing on the other side. But it wasn't my parents. It was a man. He was tall and thin, with short black hair and scruffy facial hair. He looked about 24 or 25, way older than anyone I'd ever seen walking around town. And in our town, you knew everybody. This guy, I'd never seen him before. I froze for a second, confused and uneasy. I held up a finger to him like saying 1 second and quickly closed the curtain. When I turned around, I saw my siblings staring at the door. Their face was pale, and I could tell they'd seen the guy too. Before either of us could say a word, the knocking turned into pounding. The door rattled as the man grabbed the handle and started shaking it. The noise echoed through the house, and I could feel my heart beating faster with every bang. "Come on," my sibling whispered, grabbing my hand and pulling me into the kitchen. They moved quickly, opening in the drawer and grabbing a knife. The first one snapped in their hand. It was an old flimsy thing. Without missing a beat, they grabbed another knife, a sturdier one. I clung to their arm as they led me into the laundry room, where we crouched behind the washing machine. We held each other tight. The pounding on the door didn't stop. It sounded like the man was trying to break the door down. My sibling whispered for me to stay quiet, and I nodded, too scared to even cry. Minutes passed like hours. The banging was so loud, I was sure the door was going to burst open any second. Then it did. I heard the front door creak open and footsteps echoed in the hallway. My sibling tightened their grip on the knife, ready to jump up and protect me if the man found us. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But instead of the man, it was our mom. She rounded the corner holding 2 pizza boxes and stopped when she saw us huddled on the floor. Her face twisted with confusion. "What are you two doing down there?" she asked, setting the pizzas on the counter. We both stood up, shaky and still holding on to each other. I tried to tell her about the man, but the words came out all jumbled. My sibling managed to explain what had happened, how the man had banged on the door and tried to get in. But my mom just laughed. "Oh, that guy? Your dad's outside talking to him. He's a mechanic. He was asking about the old car in the driveway." My sibling and I exchanged a look. The car didn't even have a for sale sign on it. Why would someone come by so late at night to ask about it? Seeing the doubt on our faces, my mom tried to reassure us. "He didn't mean to scare you. He said he was sorry." She gave us both hugs and promised that the phones wouldn't be locked up again when they went out. We spent the rest of the night eating pizza, but neither of us said much. As a kid, I believed my mom. If she said the guy was harmless, then he probably was. But now that I'm older, I can't stop thinking about that night. Why would a grown man pound on the door like that, shaking the handle and trying so hard to get in? If he was just looking to talk about the car, why didn't he leave when no one answered? And why would he come so late at night? It wasn't just strange, it was wrong. The more I think about it, the more I realize how lucky we were. If my parents hadn't come home when they did, who knows what might have happened. My sibling was brave that night, braver than I was, but we were just kids. We wouldn't have stood a chance if that man had gotten inside. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I can't shake the feeling that we were in real danger that night. And that's the scariest part, knowing that something terrible could have happened, and we might never have seen it coming. I never thought something like this would happen to me. I live alone out in the country, miles from any real neighbors, and that's the way I like it. It's quiet, peaceful, and predictable until it wasn't. I was sitting on my back porch that morning with a cup of coffee like I do most days. The air was crisp. The morning where you could see your breath if the sun hadn't fully warmed the air yet. My house backs up to a thick patch and the view is one of the reasons I bought the place. It feels like you're in your little world. The trees were swaying gently in the breeze when I first saw him. At first I thought it was a deer or maybe a stray dog weaving through the trees. Then the bigger stepped out of the tree line and I realized it was a man. He looked rough, wild almost. His clothes were filthy and torn, his hair sticking out in matted clumps. He just stood there for a moment and I wondered if maybe he was lost or in trouble. But then he started running, not just jogging or stumbling. Running straight toward my house, head down, fist pumping. My stomach dropped and I froze for a second, my brain trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't right. This wasn't some lost hiker. I bolted inside and locked the back door, my hands shaking as I slid the deadbolt into place. My heart was pounding, but I didn't have time to think. I ran through the house, locking every door and window I could think of. I grabbed my phone and called. Someone's trying to get into my house. I told the operator. He's running at me. He came out of the woods. Stay calm, she said, her voice steady. Is he still outside? I don't know, I said. I don't think he's made it to the house yet. That's when I heard it, the faint creak of a floorboard. It wasn't coming from the porch. It was coming from inside the house. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. My basement stairs creak like that when someone steps on them. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This guy might already be inside. I moved slowly toward the hallway where the basement door was. It was open, a crack just enough for me to see the dark stairwell beyond. That's when I remembered the basement windows. They're small and easy to miss, but they don't latch as tightly as they should. I'd been meaning to fix them for months, but never got around to it. My mind raced. Had he broken in last night? Had he been in my house the whole time? I told the operator what I was hearing. She urged me to stay calm, to keep myself safe, and to lock myself in a room if I could. But I couldn't just hide, not knowing he was in here with me. I grabbed my shotgun from the hall closet. I keep it loaded with non-lethal rounds for scaring off coyotes or the occasional stray dog. I checked the barrel, rock salt, rubber bullets, and then a live shell at the end. I didn't expect to ever need that last one. The footsteps grew louder, climbing the stairs slowly and deliberately. My pulse was racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. The door creaked open and he stepped into the hallway. He was massive, taller than I'd realized when I saw him outside with broad shoulders and arms that hung like dead weight at his sides. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and locked onto me. He didn't say a word, just started walking toward me. His movements jerky and unnatural like a puppet on strings. Stop, I shouted, raising the shotgun. Don't come any closer. He didn't and flinch. The first shot hit him square in the chest. Rock salt. It should have stopped him in his tracks, but he didn't even seem to notice. He kept coming, his lips crawling into a twisted grin. I fired again, this time with a rubber bullet. It knocked him back a step, but that grin never left his face. He let out a low, guttural growl, something primal, not even human, and lunged forward. I had no choice. The third shot was live ammunition, buckshot. It hit him in the chest and blood sprayed across the walls. He staggered, his breath hitching, but he didn't stop. I fired again, and this time he fell to the ground, but even then he crawled toward me. I backed away, my hands trembling, but he was too fast. He grabbed my legs, pulling me down with him. We hit the floor hard. His weight pressed down on me, his hands clawing at my arms and chest. I could feel his hot, ragged breath on my face and smell the blood and sweat. I thought this was it. I thought he was going to kill me. Then, just as suddenly as he'd attacked, he stopped. His body went limp, and I managed to push him off me. He collapsed onto the floor, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Blood pooled beneath him, seeping into the cracks between the floorboards. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, my hands still gripping the shotgun. I could hear the sound of sirens in the distance growing louder. The police arrived minutes later. Guns drawn, they swept through the house, but there was no one else. The operator had heard everything. The gunshots, the shouting, the struggle, and had sent them as fast as she could. Later I found out who he was. The man had escaped from a mental hospital in Baltimore, about 50 miles away. He'd broken out days earlier and somehow made his way to my house. The police think he found the basement window and climbed in during the night, squatting there until morning. The investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing. Self-defense, they said, but that didn't make it any easier to live with. The thought of him sleeping down there just beneath my feet still haunt me. Sometimes I wonder if I'd checked the basement the night before. Maybe I could have avoided all of this. Maybe he'd still be alive. I patched up the basement window and replaced the door lock. But I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe here again. Some things just leave a mark.